to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a new podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. This is the weekend review show. So what we're going to do is go over last weekend, walk through the top 10, and then do some deep dives on the new wide release openers from last weekend, Doctor Strange, Trolls, and Hacksaw Ridge. So let's start with walking through the top 10 that got released. I guess these are preliminary numbers. I don't know if Box Office Mojo has updated these to actuals yet. Oh, they did. So it's a little bit different. Doctor Strange went up about $500,000. So let's walk through the top 10 here. No surprise to most people. In number one, the number one spot was Doctor Strange. This is the Marvel movie, of course. I think everybody knows about this film. I don't really need to explain it. It was kind of an unknown quantity about, I would say, 6 months ago, just because the first trailers that came out seemed a little bit tepid. The visuals didn't look all that clear, but it turned out to be a real winner at the box office. So it came in with the actuals of $85.058 million, $85 million, let's be honest. With a almost $22,000 per screen per theater average PTA on about 3,900 screens. So a really, really strong opening for Doctor Strange overall. I had predicted, and I actually wrote down my predictions this time so I don't sound like an idiot when I'm trying to review what I did. I said $100 million for Doctor Strange. So I was very, very long on this film. I thought it was coming around at just the right time. There hadn't been a really big movie in this genre since Suicide Squad back in August. So I felt like Doctor Strange was really going to hit a home run. And it did. Well, it hit a home run, but I thought it was going to hit a grand slam. And so my prediction was off about $15 million. I'm still somewhat happy with that prediction, just because when we were looking at the industry predictions, they were talking mostly, mid 60s to mid 70s. Now it started to creep up as we got closer to launch because I think people could feel the buzz for it, and the reviews started coming in, and it ended up with I think a 90 in Rotten Tomatoes, which was fantastic. And you can't ask for a better opening than this, I think, if you're Marvel. I think they were probably a little bit concerned that it was a newer character that people probably know from the comic books, but we haven't seen a Doctor Strange movie yet. So it was a little bit of an untested quantity. The predictions were a lot lower about 6 or 7 months ago than they are now. I think people were talking about maybe it's going to do the Ant-Man number of 55. But that opened up in summer, so you could even argue that well, maybe that's a stretch. But once the actual footage came out and they saw what they were going to do with this movie, it was pretty clear it's going to be a big hit, and it's a huge hit. So that came in $85 million. I was off about $15 million. The rest of the projections were, the closest one in terms of the industry was Box Office Mojo, which was actually predicted $85 million. Box Office Pro had predicted 88, so those guys were very close. Coming in at number 2 this weekend was Trolls. This is the animated film based on the toy from the 1990s. It came in at $46.6 million on 4,060 screens, with a per theater average of about $11,500. Now this one definitely overperformed, and I know I sound like an idiot because last week I was making fun of Entertainment Weekly for predicting that Trolls would do 50 million. I just didn't see it. No one else really saw it. The consensus among the other sort of online publications like Deadline and IndieWire said 30s. Some said 40s. I said my guess was $33 million. So I was really far off on this one. Not just in terms of the aggregate money, but just in the concept of the film doing decently versus really well. And Trolls, just it basically hit a home run. And that per theater average of 11K is great. It's great for a movie like this. I was thinking it was going to do about 8K. And you sort of understand when you dive into this stuff a little bit more, you begin to realize that the per theater average is what really drives everything here. I was only off by 3K per theater on that average, but that's multiplied out over and over and over again. So I ended up being $13 million off of my prediction. I predicted 33 and it came in at 46. So it's that per theater average that you really have to pinpoint and try and get as specific as you can by, running through comparables and stuff like that. So this movie ended up doing, a lot better than the other animated films this year, like Storks and Ice Age. Now, of course, it wasn't up to the Secret Life of Pets range or Finding Dory, but it certainly outperformed Angry Birds, which I didn't really know the cultural cachet of Trolls these days. I just know it from growing up. So I think I definitely underestimated the children appeal to this brand. I guess it's a brand. Is there there's got to be like a TV show or something? I'm just so out of loop with like children's stuff that I just don't know how popular these guys are. But apparently they're very popular. So Trolls came in at $46 million, almost $46.5 million this weekend. Then Hacksaw Ridge doing pretty well in number 3 spot here. This is the Mel Gibson war movie about the the pacifist who goes into war and becomes a medic and saves people, all that good stuff. Did quite well. Did $15.2 million this weekend on only about 2,900 screens. So a wide opener, but not super wide, with a per theater average of about $5,200. Now, I'd guess that it would do a little bit better than this, but I'm pretty happy about this prediction. So I had guessed it would be $17.2 million with a $6K per theater average. I wasn't that far off. I was basically about $2 million off. Other predictions that came in for that film were a lot lower. They were saying more like the low teens, basically 10, 11. So it definitely outperformed what people thought it was going to do. And I think that's mostly due to the quality of the film. Now, I'll say all 3 of the new openers, Doctor Strange, Trolls, and Hacksaw Ridge, did get A's on CinemaScore. So we got straight A's, not even A-minuses, just straight up A's. So that means everybody who went to see it the first couple days really, really enjoyed these films. So kind of a high quality, really fun opening weekend here for all 3 of these movies. And then we had some holdovers bringing up the rear of the top 10 here, or the last part of the top 10. Boo Madea Halloween came in at number 4 with about $7.7 million. Huge drop on this one. But it makes sense, right? Like, because last weekend was Halloween weekend. This is a Halloween movie. It dropped 55%. This last weekend, dropped a few screens as well. Per theater average was all right, about $3,500 per theater. Number 5 was Inferno. What a disaster of a film. I mean, come on, guys. Ron Howard, what are you going to do with your life? He's probably just going to make millions of dollars producing TV shows or something. I don't think he's going to be directing a big movie anytime soon. Inferno was the big flop, the Tom Hanks, Dan Brown, Robert Langdon movie. Came in with $6.2 million, a 58% drop from last weekend. And keep in mind, this is only its second weekend. Terrible drop for that film. Only had a per theater average of $1,700. Ouch. That will disappear quite quickly from the Cineplex. Coming at number 6 was The Accountant. This is the Ben Affleck weird spy thriller where he's an accountant and he's also a hitman at the same time. Came in at $5.8 million, $5.9 million almost. Great drop, 30% drop. That's awesome for its 4th weekend. And it is now around $71 million for The Accountant. If you told me it was going to make over $70 million, I would be, you're full of it. But it's sticking around too. With a 30% drop like that, that's great. It means people are really into it. Good word of mouth. Audiences really like the film. Coming at number 7 was Jack Reacher, Never Go Back. This is the sequel, obviously, to the Tom Cruise action movie. Came in at $5.4 million. Decent 43% drop. Not terrible, not great. Well, actually, it's not that bad. It has only grossed about $50 million so far, so it will come in under the original, which I believe grossed around $80 million. It will not make it there. Coming at number 8 was Ouija, Origin of Evil, with $3.9 million. A little bit smaller of a drop than I thought it would be. It only dropped about 45% from last weekend. You would think with an Ouija movie like this, going from a horror weekend or Halloween weekend to, the first real weekend in November, you would think like a 60% drop, kind of like what Madea did, but I guess it outperformed. It's at $31 million right now, which is all right. The budget was only $9 million. Obviously, you gotta factor in about $40 to $50 million for marketing alone. That's just domestic, probably, 80 million total worldwide marketing. But it'll probably make its money back on VOD and Netflix streaming, all that sort of pay cable stuff. Coming at number 9 was Girl on the Train. It's hanging in there. It's just somehow it is hanging in there. I don't know how. It's in its 5th weekend. It came in with about $2.7 million. Great drop, about 38% drop from last weekend. It's just one of those movies that's sticking around, but it's not going to stick around much longer. Lost about 1,200 screens this weekend, so it is definitely getting moved aside for some newer movies. Had a 1,700 per theater average, just about where Inferno was for its 2nd weekend. Keep in mind, Girl on the Train is in its 5th weekend. So Inferno, oh man, I could just rip on that film all day. It's one of those films that deserves to fail because nobody wanted to see it, nobody asked for it, and it seemed like an incredibly tepid film that critics just ravaged. So I don't really feel bad when movies like that fail, because it sends a message to the studios: don't shove shit down our throats. If it's not good, don't release it. And I'm glad that people didn't go see it. Anyway, that was pretty harsh, but it is what it is. Coming in at number 10 was Home for Peculiar Children. I always get that title wrong. That's a Tim Burton movie. It's been out for 6 weeks now. Had a really big budget on it. It's up to $83 million so far. Kind of a mixed performance for that film. I think they expected it to do significantly more than that, but I don't know what they're asking for. I mean, it's a Tim Burton movie that looked, I guess, like a children's film, but like you never know with Tim Burton, because like Edward Scissorhands looked like a children's film probably in the trailer, but when you watched it, you're like, what is this absurdist, surrealist nightmare that I'm watching? In any event, I think it's doing all right. So that's the top 10. One thing I do want to note outside of the top 10 is Moonlight. This is the sort of Oscar buzzy film that got released 3 weeks ago by A24, which is sort of like one of those studio upstarts that's doing amazing work. It came in at $1.2 million, just below out of the top 10 in the 11th place for the weekend. And that's only on 83 theaters. So, its per theater average was about $15,000, which was higher than Trolls. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at that sort of stuff. Like, now, like, granted, if it's a limited release like this, it's in 83 theaters. My guess it's only in major cities. So there's definitely a desire to see this film in like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, probably like Miami too. Does this, the big question for Moonlight is, how is this going to translate to wider audiences? I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee, and I kind of wonder how it's going to play here. If it's ever going to open. I imagine it'll probably open here, but that's up to A24. Like, I think what A24 has proven with this release is that you can still do that really old-fashioned limited release schedule. New York, Los Angeles, let it play for a couple of weeks, then expand a little bit more, and then a little bit more. I don't know how much they're going to expand it any more than this. They don't really need to. It's sort of made it's sent the message that it needs to send. This is an amazing movie. Everybody should see it. Let's get nominated for all these awards. Does it really need to play in Nashville, Tennessee? Probably not. If I were them, I'd be like, all right, this is a good run. Let's sort of taper it down. Maybe keep it in those big cities for a while. But then, like, oh man, I just wish we got to the point where I could see this movie on Netflix in a couple of months, or maybe even a month. And I think like that would do wonders for this film, especially with the awards contention stuff coming up. Anyway, I just want to note Moonlight because it's one of those fascinating pictures that is doing quite well. And I think we have not heard the last of that film. I think it's going to come out a lot with the Oscars. So that's the top 10 plus one. Nothing really else to note in the top 20. Everything else is sort of all that old stuff just fading away. Sully is $123 million. That's unbelievable. I think that's got to be maybe the number one movie for the fall. I have to check that right now because it might not be the case. That would be Q3 2016. Oh, I guess Secret Life of Pets counts as Q3. Oh, I guess September is part of Q3. I should know that. I used to work in retail. In any event, let's do a deep dive on the 3 openers this weekend and talk about them just a little bit more. I won't go on and on about them because I did mention them already. And so, and number 1 this weekend was Doctor Strange, $85 million. I think this is a sign that Marvel has found their formula. They've found their formula and they are a brand of integrity. And what I mean by that is that when you think Marvel and you hear that a Marvel movie is coming out, you are going to associate with that high quality, entertaining, just a great film. Maybe not film, we'll call it a movie. I won't get into the distinction, but it's a piece of entertainment. It's not necessarily high art. I don't think Doctor Strange was high art. Although it did get very high Rotten Tomato scores, but I have to double check this. If you actually look a little bit closer at the scores for Doctor Strange, it's certainly an entertaining movie. It came in at 90%, but the actual scores was 7.3 out of 10. So just something to think about. It's highly regarded among critics as an enjoyable film, but it's certainly not without its flaws. The audience score on that was 91%. So, the audience has clearly spoken that they love Doctor Strange. I think the bigger story here is that, Marvel is now set in stone as one of the best studios for making high quality blockbusters. And we can trust them now to take almost any character and make it into something that is pretty awesome. And again, I've spoken before about this on the podcast, but I'm not the hugest fan of comic book movies or graphic novel movies, whatever you want to call them. I don't really care. I have a background in art criticism. I have a master's in literary theory. So I am kind of a snob when it comes to things. I'm not going to shy away from that. I'm definitely a snob, especially when it comes to art criticism. And it's the comic book Marvel phenomenon, DC phenomenon. It has been so fascinating because I've seen it happen I remember seeing the first X-Men, I think in 2000. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. Like, I wonder what this is all about. We can see a lot more of these. And then you just saw this wave. And I did this really, really long, crazy post on Reddit about the comic book movie sort of waves that came in of popularity. And I wish I could remember all the points off the top of my head. But I had, and this is a long-standing topic with this whole phenomenon. There's not been a phenomenon like comic book movies and their success in the film industry in my lifetime. It's such a fascinating, interesting, special moment for that genre. To see a genre go from a joke in the 80s and 90s, with your exceptions like Batman, to be this basically the most successful film genre of the last almost 20 years now. About 16, but let's just call it 20. My theory, with the comic book movie stuff is that at some point it has to shift, right? At some point tastes are going to change. And I wrote this super long post on Reddit probably about a year ago under some pseudonym. I always change my name on Reddit. But the whole point of it, my thesis is basically that, like, at some point the comic book movie boom will have to go bust. It has to. Taste will change. Films will come out that aren't great. And I was writing this in fall of 2015. And so I was like, Ant-Man did okay in the theaters, opened at 55, ended it at 180. Not bad, but certainly not like the $250-300 million that they were probably hoping for. And certainly they played down their expectations on that, but that's what they were hoping for, that it would sort of bust out. And then you had Fantastic Four, which was an absolute complete debacle of a film. And it sort of played into this sort of narrative of like, we didn't have a huge comic book movie in that last half of the year. And so that was all leading up to Deadpool. And my theory on Deadpool was that, like, hey, it's a minor character. I know Ryan Reynolds has really made it into a passion project, and so did the director, who actually they just split up for Deadpool 2. They're not doing it together. I just felt like it was still a minor character in the X-Men world. It was opening in February on Valentine's Day. I was just like, there is no way this is going to do well. I think I predicted it opening in the 30s, not 130s, but it actually opened in the 30s. Again, that was probably a few months before that. You know, it was so surprising to me that a somewhat minor character, and again, I'm not in the comic book world. I think in the comic book world, he's regarded much more highly than the average person would sort of know him. But the character itself was not that known by mass audiences, and it just, you know, obviously that movie crushed it. So the whole theory that like at some point the comic book sort of bubble has to burst, it just, I don't know. I still believe it. Obviously, everything changes, and culture is always changing, and it's always super dynamic. At some point, audiences will move on to something else. But at this point, with how, you know, Batman versus Superman was not a huge bust. It was a bust. I don't think they're going to make money on it. That was a big argument on all the forums and stuff. Is it going to make money? Is it not? I don't think it's going to make money in a day. But Captain America did fantastic. I actually had to look up how much that did overall, because I'm really fascinated by it. But that was really Avengers 3, let's be honest. Like, it wasn't another Captain America movie. They called it Captain America Civil War, but it was essentially, you know, Avengers 3. And so, you know, basically they're winning again. And like with Doctor Strange, it's a really interesting example of who is this character? I don't know. Like, apparently people really like him. Again, I don't know if the character was that well known outside of sort of the comic book world. But, you know, a lot more people than just comic book nerds went to go see this movie this weekend. You know, did $85 million. That's insanity. Especially in, you know, November now, early November. We're not even to the holiday season yet. So what this tells me is that, like, you know, comic book movies probably just aren't going to go away in the foreseeable future. There's definitely going to be the misses, like your Fantastic Fours. And like you'll have your like sort of mediocre successes like Ant-Man. But if they can do this over and over again, Marvel at least, and Suicide Squad I think did, you know, decently well this summer. Probably not as well as DC wanted to do, but I think it did more than well enough to make a lot of money. I think Doctor Strange just proves that Marvel has created this factory that will always pump out, not always, that for the foreseeable future will pump out super high quality films that are going to make a lot of profit. And that's kind of amazing. They've solved one of the riddles of movie production in the film business. And it's just awesome to see that. And I'm not even a huge fan of their films, but it's just, as from a business perspective, it is really just kind of fantastic to analyze and look at and kind of be in awe of what they've accomplished as a business. To find a way to take different characters, different perspectives and different genres and keep creating films that are profitable on the level that these films are profitable, you know, in the tens, in the hundreds of millions of dollars in profit, not revenue, you know, money in their pocket. It's pretty fantastic. So that's all I really got to say about Doctor Strange. It's kind of a really cool phenomenon to see. I think it's going to do great in terms of its legs, probably 3x, at least 3x. You know, Beast is coming out in a couple of weeks. Nothing really besides Arrival coming out this weekend. So it's got a couple of weeks of clear runway to really take off here. So I don't know what it's going to end up at. Who knows? At least 250, I think. Well, yeah, definitely over 250. The question is, can it leg it out to 300? That would be interesting. So let's move on a little bit to talk a little about Trolls. I wasn't really excited to talk about this one last weekend or in last week's prediction show. And I'm really not that excited to talk about it right now, to be honest with you. But, you know, I was pretty far off in this one. I said $33 million on Trolls and ended up with 46. You know, it was a super saturated opening. And like a lot of my friends with kids said, hey, man, there has not been a decent children's film that has been out. And the reviews that I got from my friends who are parents who went to go with their children, Didn't really like it that much. So the A cinema score seems kind of off to me. Let's actually gonna check it on Rotten Tomatoes. So it did 73% on the critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, and only a 77 on the audience liking it. So it's kind of I think mixed results overall in terms of the quality of the film. But the money it made is absolutely real. And it just goes to show you, if you're releasing a children's film that hasn't been one for a good month and some, you're going to get a huge bump just because, parents want to get their kids out of the house and take them to the movie theater and sort of escape for a bit. So Trolls definitely overperformed for what people were saying, and congrats to Entertainment Weekly, who I dissed last week for guessing $50 million. They were the closest, besides Collider, who said $45 million. And I have no idea where they get their numbers from, but they did a really good job. In any event, let's go into the last film, sort of brief overview of Hacksaw Ridge. I was only about $2 million off on this one. It did $15.2 million this weekend. Kind of a weird opening number of like 2,900 screens. So definitely wide release, but not a super saturated release. And that makes sense for a movie like this. It's a quite graphic war film by Mel Gibson. This is Mel Gibson's big big comeback, right? Like, he was basically blacklisted from the industry for about 10 years after his racist and anti-Semitic remarks he made to a police officer while, I believe, high or drunk, or one of the two, or both. It's cool to see him come back, and it's cool to see him make a really high quality film. It seems like people really love it. It's definitely one of those films that your parents go and see and just really enjoy it if they're in like their 50s or 60s or whatever, or older. It's got that feel to like an old people movie. 87 on Rotten Tomatoes, so definitely fresh. 96% of the audience liked it on the RT audience score. That's really high. That's like super high. And what that tells me is that with a movie like this, with kind of an uplifting, inspiring story, is that, we're going to hear about this film all the way through the Oscars. Maybe, Best Picture for Mel Gibson, maybe Best Actor for Andrew Garfield. Kind of a little comeback for him. He had a little rough patch with the whole Superman stuff. I think he's a good actor. That accent, though, in the trailers was pretty terrible as someone who's lived in the South for a while. So that's sort of recap. Headlines are basically Doctor Strange crushed it. Did better than what people had projected it was going to do. Less than what my outrageous projections were at 100 million. But I don't know. I felt like it could have done it, maybe. Also, Marvel is just untouchable at this point. They're basically printing money. They have like this unbelievable factory of creating successful, profitable blockbusters that I don't think I've ever seen. Certainly not in my lifetime of following the box office, and I can't even think of any examples going back, all the way to the 80s or 70s of anything like this, where a company has just really pinpointed a formula that works for so many different characters and genres. Like Doctor Strange, like what genre is that? You can call it a comic book movie, but like a lot of those films, like Ant-Man was pretty like a caper film, kind of comedic. Civil War was pretty like sober. I'm not really sure. This sort of Doctor Strange reminded me of Inception meets The Matrix type thing. So I think, Marvel can basically be successful doing a lot of different types of genres, which is amazing. It's amazing to see. Trolls did really well. I think it's just because there hasn't been a big children's film out for a while. I don't think it's going to last very long. I don't think people are liked it that much. I think it's going to get sort of cut off when Beasts opened in a couple of weeks. And last but not least was Hacksaw Ridge, the big opener, semi-big opener this week. The headline there is Mel Gibson's back. I mean, that's sort of the short and long of it. Anyway, I will be back later this week, guys, with predictions for the openers coming up for the November 11th weekend. We have Arrival coming. I'm so excited for this film, and I have been for forever. It has 100 score on Rotten Tomatoes right now, and you think, oh, well, maybe it's like 10 reviews or whatever. No, it's 66 reviews for Arrival. all positive. It has an 8.5 score. People are, I think nerds like myself are really stoked about this. Like, it's going to be an awesome movie, I think. But is it really going to do that well? I don't know. I bought a lot of it in Hollywood Stock Exchange and I made like $5 million off of it. But it started to drop today, actually. It started to tank. So I don't know how well that movie's going to do. I hope it does well, but I'm not sure it's going to translate over to general audiences as much outside of the sort of nerdy sci-fi crowd. Also coming out next week is Shut In, Naomi Watts' horror film. That's not going to do well, I can tell you that right now. Almost Christmas is coming out a little early for that. And then Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. That's the Ang Lee sort of anti-war movie that was shot in some specific style, and I can't remember what it is. The reviews for that are not good. But I'll go more in depth with those films later this week. For the weekend projection show, which I'll probably post on Thursday. This has been the Wildline Podcast, guys. Thanks for listening.